there, welcome to the isolation sewing tutorial. My name is Jennifer Anderson. I am the owner and operator of Soul Stitches sewing classes. Some of you may remember me from when I had the studio at McKinnon Road in McKinnon. I'm now operating my business from a home-based studio. I teach children and adults the wonderful art of sewing. I'm a very creative person. I absolutely love fabric. I love anything creative, particularly sewing, and I'm working with the Glen Ira City Council to bring to you 4 different tutorials over the next 4 weekends. And today we are going to be making this fabric tub. As you can see, there are many different uses. Most of mine are used as pot holders. You can use them for a variety of things. So where you have found this video, you should also be able to find a list of tools and fabrics that you need to complete the project. If you can't see the list, I'm going to put it up on the screen now, so you can pause the video, go and get everything you need to complete the project, and then we can get moving. Okay, on that note, let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is make our paper pattern. So when we have finished this step, you will end up with your pattern like this. You will need your piece of paper, your A4 piece of paper, a ruler, pen or pencil, and paper cutting scissors. Okay, so once we've finished cutting the pattern, this is what it's going to look like. So let's get started. So we're going to take our A4 sheet of paper and we're going to fold it in half lengthways. This just makes it easier. Then we're going to fold it out after we've finished. We're going to cut a 6 centimetre section off the top just to make it that little bit shorter. If you've got a cutting blade and a ruler and a cutting mat, you can use that at this point to keep it nice and square. It's really important to keep your lines square and straight. So what we're going to do now is cut a little corner out of the bottom here. So we're going to measure up 3.5 centimeters from the bottom, and we're going to measure in 4.5 centimeters, nice and square. I'm going to use my square to measure that. So this measurement here is 3.5 centimeters. This measurement here is 4.5 centimeters. This is a square here, and as you can see, this has been drawn on the unfolded edge, and we're now going to cut that out. So you can use a pair of scissors or you can use a blade, whatever suits best. Okay, and then we open our pattern and we have our tub shape. Now this will fold over at the top here, which gives us the contrast on the inside. We're going to draw a line down the center there where our fold line was exactly, and that is going to be our straight grain line. We're going to write on the bottom of our pattern, place on fold here. So this line will sit on the fold of your fabric. On this pattern we also have 1 centimetre seam allowances, so we're just going to put a little mark here to say that this is a 1 centimetre seam allowance, and on the top of this pattern we have a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. So I'm just going to mark that. Not essential to mark, but just good to remind yourself that that's what you're working with. So we have our pot. 1 centimetre seam allowances down here, 1.5 up the top. This is the top, and these are the 2 corners that help to make our base. Okay, so now that we've completed our pattern, we are going to write cut one on fold in the main fabric, and then you're going to cut one on fold in your lining fabric. So basically you have the two fabrics, one is your main fabric and one is the lining. Having said that, it is reversible. Okay, so now we've finished our pattern, we are going to cut out our fabric. So you'll need your two pieces of fabric that once we have finished will look like this. We will have two pieces cut like that. You will need your pattern that we have already made. If you are using a cutting mat, you will need your rotary cutter and possibly a weight. If you are not using a cutting mat and rotary cutter, you will need a pair of scissors and pins to pin your pattern to your fabric. You will also need a piece of dressmaker's chalk. If you don't have dressmaker's chalk, you can use a remnant of soap. If you don't have either of those, a pencil will be fine. Okay, so now we are going to cut out our pattern. So now I'm going to show you how to fold and cut your fabrics. This piece here we're going to cut with the mat and the rotary cutter, and this lining piece we're going to cut with these pins and scissors. So first thing we're going to do is fold our fabric right side to right side. This fabric doesn't have a right and wrong side so much, so we're just going to fold it like this, making sure the edges are lined up evenly. And this piece here does have a right and wrong side. You can see the pattern is actually slightly bolder on the correct side of the fabric, so we're going to fold it right side to right side, making sure that it's nice and neat. Now we're going to make sure that our pattern is placed correctly on our neatly folded fabric. So now we're going to place the place on fold edge of our pattern onto the folded edge of our fabric, and we're going to confirm that it is straight by measuring with our ruler from the top of the straight grain line out to the edge of our fabric, and the bottom of our straight grain line out to the edge of our fabric. They should be the same measurement, which mine are both 13 centimeters. If you have folded your fabric correctly and you've placed your pattern correctly onto your folded piece of fabric, these two measurements here should be exactly the same. It's very important to make sure that your pattern is on your fabric correctly. So we are good to go. So I'm going to cut this piece out with my rotary cutter. I'm going to use my ruler here, which will, because it's so big, hold the pattern straight. I'm going to line that up with the edge of the pattern. Cut that edge out there. This is a bit awkward because I am not moving my board around, which I would normally do. And I'm going to go up into there. May need to just get the scissors and just do a little snip like that there, and a little snip like that there. Now you lift the pattern off, you have your first piece. This is where you're going to use your dressmaker's chalk or your pencil, and you are just going to mark the bottom here of your tub so that when you open it out you have a little mark to show you where the bottom is. This one we're going to cut out using pins and scissors. You've laid your pattern onto your fabric the same as before, making sure that the place on fold is exactly on the fold of your fabric. Now my recommendation here is that we pin all four corners. Do not go in a clockwise or anti-clockwise direction. Pin your top corner, and then making sure that it's still lined up, pin the bottom, and then perhaps just put a couple of extra pins, depends how good you are at cutting, if you need to. Double check that it's laid nice and flat still and lined up with the bottom, and then get your scissors, cut up from the folded edge. And cutting into there like that, and then into there. At this point we use our chalk again to mark the bottom. Once again we have our fabric cut out with our little notches marking the base. Okay, so now we're going to pin our fabrics together in preparation for sewing. As you can see, I have pinned one side of the outside of our fabric here, and I'm going to pin the other side. So flip it over, one pin in the top, one pin in the middle, and one pin at the bottom. We're going to do the same thing on the lining. On one side, pin in the top, pin in the middle, and a pin at the bottom. On the other side, we need to leave a gap so that when we've finished making our tub, we can turn it through. So we're going to use our chalk, and we're going to measure down 8 centimeters from the top of our tub, and we're going to measure that. We want to have an opening of about 7 centimeters. Doesn't really matter, but you need to have it big enough to be able to get your fingers in when we've finished. Then just pop a few pins in there to hold it in place. If you want to, you can use a different color pin at the beginning and the end of your opening just to remind yourself that there are to be no pins, or you can pop a pin in that way just to remind yourself that we are not sewing on that bit there. Okay, and we are good to go. Now that we're all pinned, I'm going to head over to my sewing machine and we're going to do the rest of the steps from there. Okay, so we're going to start off by sewing the side seams of our main fabric. We are using a 1 centimeter seam allowance, so that means that your stitching line needs to be 1 centimeter away from the cut edge of your fabric, and that needs to be consistent the whole way down the seam. We're going to start and finish all of our seams with a lock stitch or a target stitch or a reverse stitch depending on the machine that you have. I'm going to use the reverse stitch here today. I'm also stitching with not matching thread just so that I can show you and you can see what I am sewing. Okay, so here we go. Make sure when you're stitching that you are pulling your pins out as you're going. Do not sew over your pins because you'll damage your needle. That's your first seam done, and now we're going to go over to the other side and stitch the other side. Okay, so that's our 2 side seams on the main part of our pot done. We're going to repeat that on one side of our lining. And on the other side of our lining, we are going to be leaving the opening so that we can turn our pot through afterwards. So doing that side, you start off with a reverse stitch. And then when you get to your mark, 8 centimeters down from the top, you're going to do another reverse stitch. Take it out. So we've stopped here, and then we're going to start again where our next mark is. And that's that one done. Okay, so now that we have stitched these side seams, we are actually going to press our seams what's called open. So we're going to put our pressing ham inside our tub. Now if you don't have a pressing ham, no dramas, you can actually use a rolled up towel, which I'll demonstrate in a moment. So we're just going to press our seams so they're nice and flat like that. If you don't have a pressing ham, you can use a rolled up towel and put your rolled up towel inside your pot. It's just as effective. Split your seams open with your fingers and then press them flat. And then repeat the same thing on the other side. Okay, so now that we've pressed our seams open, we are going, and you have to stay with me here because this is a little bit tricky, we are going to fold, this is to make the flat base at the bottom of the pot. We are going to fold our corners like this, and you want your seam to match up exactly with your mark that you made with your chalk when you were cutting your pattern out. Now it's probably going to be easier to lay it flat down on the table, and we are going to put a pin in, making sure that your side seam is lined up exactly with your mark that you made when you were cutting out. And then, now this is really important, when we're stitching it, you need to make sure that you start right from here, right back here, and you stitch all the way across to this very end here. And then you're going to do the same thing on the other side, stitching from here over to here. So make sure you do not stitch them together like that. You have to have this one out of the way and stitch just the one. Okay, so we're going to stitch 1 centimeter seam once again with a reverse stitch at the beginning and a reverse stitch at the end, making sure you pull your pins out as you go and that these seams remain nice and flat. If you find that your seams start to fold over while you're stitching, you can just stop and lift up your foot and put it back down again after you have pushed it back under. So this is what it should look like. Make sure that you cut all your threads off so that you've got no little tails. Okay. So we now have our 2 pieces of fabric completed. We're going to leave this one inside out, and we're actually going to turn this one in the right way. And you can see we have our little gap here. We're going to put this one inside this one. Now the most important thing here, is to absolutely make sure that those 2 side seams are matched up perfectly. They need to be matched up. We also need to be making sure that our cut raw edges on the top of our lining and the top of our outside piece are level as we are pinning. So we're going to put a pin in there to make sure that they stay nice and even. And then we're going to flip around to the other side, line up those 2 perfectly. And when you're doing this, you want to make sure also that your seams are sitting nice and flat on that side as well. And then we're just going to pop a pin or 2, it's up to you, in here, and a pin in here. Now as you can see, we're going to be sewing around in a circle here, so it's going to be much easier if you have the option on your machine to remove your extension table. You can do that, and that then allows you to put your pot on top of the free arm here, same as if you were hemming pants or sewing something smaller. Okay, so we are good to go with our sewing around the top. So we're going to sew all the way around the top here. We're going to start with a reverse stitch and we're going to finish with a reverse stitch. But what we're going to do is we're actually going to go all the way around and cross over the beginning of our stitching about 1 centimetre. We're going to start on the side seam, making sure that your seams here are sitting really nice and flat. So we're going to put that in there. Our seam allowance on the top is 1.5 centimetres. So you want to be lining that up with the 15mm line here on the throat of your machine. So we're going to put our foot down and we are going to start off with a reverse stitch. Good idea to hold your fingers in the pot here, just keeping it nice and taut. You're not holding it tightly, but you're just keeping it taut. Pulling the pins out as we go. When you get to this seam, once again, you need to make sure that your seams, see this one here is folded over, it's trying to go the wrong way. So you've just got to manipulate it back to where you want it to be. Make sure it's sitting nice and flat, keeping in line with your 1.5. If you've pinned it correctly, your raw edges up here should be staying together. And we're going to go all the way around, pins out. And what we're going to do, you can see where I've started here. We're going to cross over about 1 centimetre, stitching absolutely straight over the top of that stitching line. And you are going to finish with a reverse stitch. And there we have it. We've stitched all the way around the top. So now we're going to pull our lining outside, so you end up with something that looks like this. And this is the bit where we are going to find our little opening. You're going to put your fingers inside there and grab hold of the bottom of the outside of your tub, and you're going to pull it through. Pull it through, pull it through, pull it through. Okay. So now we have something that looks like this. Now because we have pressed our edges really nicely, that's going to be a nice knife edge for you to sew. Your opening goes from here to here. So you want to actually start stitching a little bit further up here, and you want to finish stitching a little bit further down here, just to make sure that that's completely closed. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a couple of pins into that opening just to hold it together while we're stitching. and then you want to stitch about 2 millimeters from the edge of your folded edge here. So I'll just put that into the machine and demonstrate for you, and it will be easier to see. So once again, a reverse stitch. So you can see now that we've stitched the opening closed. Obviously, if you have used matching thread, you're not going to be able to see that. I've just done it in the black so that you can see where I have stitched. So now that we've got our pot looking like this, we're going to take it over to the ironing board and give it a press. So this is what we have. What we want to do now is make sure that the top edge of our pot is going to be nice and flat. So in order to do that, we need to give it a press before we put the lining inside. So we just want to feel with our fingers and make sure that we can feel the seam underneath the lining side. So you can feel that under there, that you've got your seam under there. And then we're going to give it a press. Make sure it's not twisted, and then fold it over. Make sure you can feel that seam under there. Give it a little press. Then you could go like that. And give that a press. Just be careful not to scrunch it up too much underneath the iron. And then what we're going to do is we're going to push the lining inside the pot and lay it on the ironing board, get it to sit nice and flat, and then we're going to press this. But what you want to do is you want to be able to see about 1 millimeter or 2 of your outside fabric rolling over into the inside, and then you just turn it around and turn it around and press it. Okay, so basically this is completed. Personally, I like top stitching, so I like to have a row of stitching around the top edge here. So I'm going to show you how to do that. You don't have to do that. If you don't do it, it just gives a little bit more of an organic look to the pot. Top stitching around the top looks really nice though. So I'm just going to take you over to the sewing machine and show you how to do that. Okay, so more often than not, top stitching is actually just decorative more than functional. Sometimes it is functional. In this case, it's actually just decorative, so you don't actually have to do the top stitching. And it is totally up to you how far away from the edge you want to do it. Personally, I think it looks good about 1 centimeter away from the edge. We had a 1.5 seam allowance when we stitched the top, so it's going to sit really nicely if you do it with a 1 centimeter. It's basically the same as when we sewed around the top of the pot, but you don't have the raw edge. So what I'm doing here is lining up the folded edge of my pot with the edge of my foot on my sewing machine here. So we're going to start off with a very small reverse stitch because you don't want it to be ugly, and we are going to stitch all the way around. Once again, I've got my fingers in here, just keeping it taut. I'm not holding it tight, I'm just keeping it a little bit taut just so that it's not flopping around all over the place. And we go all the way around. And once again, same as before, we're going to make sure that we come and stitch exactly over the top of that row of stitching that we started with, and we are going to do a small reverse stitch and then take it out. Now, you could choose to do your top stitching in a contrast color, and there we have it, all done. Now, as you can see, we can have it that way, or we can turn it through and you can have it sitting that way. So there you have it. I hope you have something that looks something like this. As you can see, there are many different uses for these. You can make them in bigger sizes, smaller sizes. You just need to either increase the pattern or decrease the pattern, the little corner cutout. There are so many different uses for these. You can use them to store things in depending on the size of it. I've got one here that I use for fabrics. If you are someone who doesn't like single-use wrapping paper, you can use them, you know, pop some little chockies in there and wrap that around and tie it up and give it as a gift. It's a great idea for a gift wrapping. And I really hope to see you next week when we will be making the toiletry bag, which is very similar in construction to the pot, but it just has a zip in the top. I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial, and I hope you are encouraged to try making more of these pots during the week, and I look forward to seeing you next week.